Sukuyanade. Welcome to the first full episode of Vodcast, the Mando'a Lessons podcast. Today, I want to talk about the development of the Mandalorian language. So, Mando'a, as I'm sure you know, is the language of the Mandalorians in Star Wars lore. It is said to be primarily a spoken language in lore. However, in real life, most interactions in the language are over internet messaging. It is an agglutinative language, meaning morphemes can be combined to create new meaning. It has very simple grammar. Gender, case, tense are all extremely easy to learn because most of the time they're completely absent. It has mutually intelligible dialects, in which words may be slightly different or entirely. As well, some dialects may have different phonology. Mando'a is the current language of the Mandalorians, but it didn't start as Mando'a. In fact, Mando'a is one of the later developments on the timeline of Mandalorian language. It all began back in 1996 with Shadows of the Empire soundtrack, where Ben Burtt, the sound designer for Star Wars, created a language called Notran Cant for the lyrics in this soundtrack. He created a poem called Da Werda Verda. This Notran Cant is described as the language of the Tongs, the people before the modern Mandalorians, an alien race. But this language is completely different from Mando'a, and bears no significance to it. In fact, it's a pretty ridiculous sounding language. It kinda sounds like they're stereotyping Germanic languages. And one line, for example, is Buten Wuten Landlock Vutem. And as you can see, this is very different from Mando'a. The only thing to come out of Notran Cant into Mando'a is the phrase itself, Da Werda Verda. But pretty much everything else is left on the cutting room floor. Next on the timeline, just before 2002, before Attack of the Clones was created, Philip Minchin was assigned to write a script for the heads-up display on Jango Fett's Slave 1 in the movie. This was called Mandalorian, spelled with an E, and it has been the official script for Mandalorians written for a while. The full script isn't widely available online as a font, so fan alternatives, usually Eric Stormtrooper's fonts, are often seen. Here is the Mandalorian script created by Philip Minchin. After the movie came out, there was a game, Knights of the Old Republic, in 2003, which featured a character named Sasha. She spoke what was in the game called Mandalorian, but again, this was not Mando'a. It bared no resemblance to it at all, and has now been retconned to being some sort of basic/Mando Creole, or even her own dialect, but again, it has nothing to do with Mando'a. Next, on the timeline, in 2004, as we start getting closer to Mando'a, a book called The Cestus Deception came out, and it featured a language, though it was very different from the previous Mandalorian languages. This is actually the very beginnings of the Concordian dialect, specifically the Concord Dawn dialect, as there is a character named Sheikah, formerly Jango's friend, who met a clone trooper. Since the clone lacked a name, she called him Jango Tat, which means brother of Jango. This construction of possessives is similar to Mando'a, but the word Tat is in the place of the word Vod, because Vod hasn't been created yet. While at this point, the dialect was very limited with how much we knew of it, but it would be developed further on. Now, on to some Mando'a. Sort of. In 2005, a video game released called Republic Commando, and the composer Jesse Harlan was assigned to create the soundtrack. He wrote out several songs with interesting sounding lyrics. Mando'a as a language didn't exist just yet, but these lyrics would serve as the basis for it. I'm sure you all know what they sound like, but I'll play it here for you. Finally, around the same time that Harlan was making the soundtrack prior to the release of the game, Karen Traviss had been writing the first book in the Republic Commando novel series, and she had created the language based off of Harlan's lyrics. The first book, Hard Contact, didn't heavily feature Mando'a, but it did introduce it. It would eventually be developed over the course of the series. Traviss used it throughout the books, including additional stuff in the back of the books, on her website, and even through magazine articles. She also included some of it in the Legacy of the Force books that she wrote. Not only did she develop Mando'a, but she also helped develop the Concordian dialect further, making it unique as well as similar to base Mando'a. And this was the peak of Mando'a. Then everything came crashing down. With the creation of the Clone Wars animated series in 2008, Karen Traviss stopped working for Lucasfilm. She and them had different ideas for Mandalorians, clones, and Jedi. Since her books were EU, or the Expanded Universe, and Clone Wars was canon, her vision lost. While I won't go in depth with the culture and the politics surrounding Mandalorians in the show, I will go over the brief appearance of Mando'a in it. In the episode The Mandalore Plot, in an early season of the Clone Wars, a Death Watch member is seen bombing a building. Afterwards, he says some lines in the Concordian dialect and jumps off a building trying to kill himself. Having survived the fall for a few minutes, he whispered to the Duchess Satine a few more lines, who responded in the language as well. And that is the first spoken Mando'a we've ever heard in Star Wars television, and it would be the only for a long time. This is what it sounds like, and let me tell you, this is way better than the only other television appearance of it, which you will see later.
Se solo, se cade, se dara sum kot, cadi, se non miim.
Ki cadi, nor miim.
Though the Mandalorians used the Mandalorian script for all their writing in the Clone Wars, it was written in Basic, or English. There are two very interesting things about the Mando'a in the Clone Wars. Firstly, the writing isn't the official Mandalorian font created by Filamention for Attack of the Clones, but rather, they used what appears to be Eric Stormtrooper's Mandalorian Old font, and I can't tell you as to why, because I have no idea. Secondly, there is one line spoken by the Death Watch bomber before he jumps. He says, Kalhava Bruchun Brausheran, which is beautiful pronunciation, by the way, on his part. But what makes this special is that this line actually originated from a fan-made list of Mando'a phrases that was compiled on an old Empire at War forum. The fact that a non-canon phrase was put into canon is very interesting indeed. Now comes the Great Purge. No, not the one from the Mandalorian television show. I'm talking about the Disney buyout of Lucasfilm. Not only was Mando'a and Travis's work shut down by the Clone Wars, now it was being shoved even further out the door, being declared legends. And we would get no development of any kind for the language for about 5 or 6 years. When we finally did get some more Mando'a, I was very excited. But once I heard it, and I realized what I was listening to, you can imagine how disappointed I was. It was so poorly pronounced, I can barely stand to listen to it. It was so perfectly pronounced in the Clone Wars. So how did they mess it up so bad? Like, in the Clone Wars, they sound like they're speaking a different language. But when they speak Mando'a in this show, it sounds like they're speaking English, but with funny words. I'm talking, of course, about Season 3 of Star Wars Rebels. And I'll play the clip for you to show exactly what I mean.
Sukuya lit ren, ibiki sabin ren, aranovar, gadetje mevartigar.
Elek Sabine Red, Cape Padre.
Shakadir!
Now, no hate to the actors. I'm sure it's not their fault. The fault belongs to whomever decided to put Mando'a in the show, but not even bother to correct the actors to get it right. Dave Filoni, what were you thinking? Anyway, Mando'a in Rebels came and went, just like it did in the Clone Wars. It only appeared once. And once again, we got another 5-year hiatus. Then, it was announced. The Mandalorian. And you can all imagine how excited I was. Finally, some live-action, spoken Mando'a. There's no way you can make a show called The Mandalorian and not have them speak Mandalorian, right? I was so excited for it to come out, I even started a YouTube channel to help people learn Mando'a for the show. I think you can all imagine my disappointment. Episode 1 went by with nothing. 2 again. Then we got to 3. Mandos, all together, speaking privately amongst themselves, and we didn't get a single word of it. They even spoke with the words a Mandalorian would use, as if they were speaking Mando'a, but they weren't. They were speaking English. I have no explanation as to why. Season 1 came and went. Then, in Season 2, we find out that Din, the Mandalorian, is part of a fundamentalist cult stemming from Death Watch that takes the Reselnare to such an extreme that they never take off their armor in front of anyone else. But they don't speak the language? I mean, we saw a Death Watch member speak Mando'a in the Clone Wars. Are you telling me a Mando cult wouldn't? It just doesn't make sense. Unless they decided now it's the Reselnare and they took out the language part of the Reselnare. I don't know. The only bit of development of Mandalorian language in the show is we get a new version of the script, which can clearly be seen in Season 2 on Boba Fett's hologram that comes out of his gauntlet. But again, it's not even Mando'a. It's simple one-to-one English transliteration, just like in the Clone Wars. And anyway, in 2020, at some point, I don't remember exactly the date, another one of those From a Certain Point of View books came out, the one about Empire Strikes Back. And there is a line in here. Here, I'll just show you a screen cap of the book. And as you can see, the best Mando'a that they can muster is Meg Kuyir Gar, for Who Are You? That is the best Mando'a they can muster. Not just the character in the book here, but it seems Lucasfilm as a whole, I suppose, can't seem to do any better than that. Wrong words, unconjugated, as if they used a translator. Well, that catches up to modern day, where we have pretty much no hope that Disney Lucasfilm will ever develop the language. The chance pretty much came and went with the Mandalorian television show, and they missed it. They missed it. And I don't think they'll ever try again, because it's a little late for that, if you ask me. Well, that's enough being negative. Let's stop living in the past and look to the future. The future of Mando'a, I think, is clear that it's not with Disney Lucasfilm, but with us. We can develop it further ourselves. In fact, we already are. There is a group in the Oyubot Discord doing it, the linguist team there. There's also a group of Russians doing it, though I don't know exactly what they call their group, but it seems to be headed by Taljer Rusk, which you might remember from the forum if you're on the forum. He created the expanded dictionary. And I'm sure there are more groups working on it themselves. But, as Mandalorians, none of us can decide which direction we want to take the language. So, if we continue to develop separately as we are, we could potentially get multiple dialects in real life, similar to in lore. Or we could try working together to create one unified standard. But given history between the groups, that's not likely. So subscribe to whichever version you wish, and help develop it if you have the knowledge or the ability. Just use it. The more we use it, the bigger it will become, and the more we can develop into a fully usable language. Personally, I'd be participating in the Oyubat dialect, as I am on the linguist team there, and once it gets to a state where it's actually usable, most likely I will teach it here under its own category so that you don't get it confused with canon. So, what else to talk about? I suppose I could quickly give my history with Mando'a, and then that'll be the end of this episode. So basically, like a lot of people, I fell in love with Star Wars at a young age. I thought Jango was the coolest dude in the prequels, and Boba in the original trilogy. I played the Bounty Hunter video game. I read the Open Seasons comic, and eventually I got into the Clone Wars. But when I saw that they had their own language in the show, when that bomber spoke in the Concordian dialect, that's what really got me into the Mandalorians, was the language, not just how badass they are, which they certainly are. I've always been linguistically inclined, so, when I found out that they had a language, that's when I started reading the Republic Commando series and joining the online forums, and eventually the Discord when it was made. And then, like I said, prior to the release of The Mandalorian, that's when I made my channel. But, yeah, there's not really much else to say about that. It took me a few years to learn the language, to at least at the level that I'm at now, because while it is a fairly easy language to learn, it's not fully complete, and there's not a lot of resources to learn it. That's why I wanted to make the channel. But, yeah, don't worry if it takes you a while to learn. The reason it took, not that long for me, is because I've always been a good language learner, and I learn lots of languages in school, and I study that in my free time. So, but it even still took me a while. So, yeah, you'll get there eventually. Well, folks, I think that's everything I wanted to cover in this episode. I don't currently have next episode about what I want to talk about, but I'll try to come up with one soon, or if you have an idea that you want me to talk about, or if you want me to speak in Mando'a with someone, I can try seeing if there's someone who wants to speak with me. I know a few people have already asked me if they wanted to be on the show. But yeah, definitely thank you for watching, and Retour chez me.